My daughter asked me to watch the kids for the weekend. That was 15 years ago. Yesterday, she showed up with police. She kidnapped my children! But when I pulled a stack of documents from the safe and showed them to the officer, his eyes widened. Are you serious? I nodded. Good day, dear listeners. It's Clara again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Marjorie Ellen Calloway, and I have lived in the same house in Mill Haven, Ohio, for 43 years. It is a white house with green shutters and a porch swing that my husband Dale built the summer before he died. When people drive past, they sometimes slow down and look at the flower beds. I have always kept good flower beds. That is the kind of woman I am. Steady, patient, someone who tends to things. I was 62 years old when my daughter Deborah called me on a Friday evening in late September and asked if I could watch her children for the weekend. Just the weekend, she said. She had a situation. She used that word, situation, the way people do when they don't want to explain themselves. I didn't press her. I had learned over the years that pressing Deborah only made her defensive, and defensiveness made her cruel. Her children were Casey, who was just shy of her 5th birthday, and Tyler, who had turned 3 in July. I had watched them before, plenty of times. Short visits, holidays, the occasional overnight. I knew their rhythms. How Casey needed her stuffed rabbit to fall asleep. How Tyler cried if you gave him the wrong colored cup. I was their grandmother, and I loved them the way you love something that came from something you once loved completely. She dropped them off on a Saturday morning. I remember it clearly. Casey wore a yellow jacket. Tyler had a smear of jelly on his chin that nobody had wiped. Deborah handed me a diaper bag and said she'd call Sunday night. She did not hug the children. She was already turning back toward her car when Tyler reached out his small hand toward her. She didn't see it, or she chose not to. Sunday came and went. No call. I told myself she was busy. Deborah had always been complicated, a word I used to soften the truth, which was that she had been difficult since adolescence, capable of warmth, but more comfortable with chaos. Her marriage to a man named Roy had ended badly 2 years prior, and she had been living in an apartment in Columbus, working at a bar, moving through life like someone constantly looking for the exit. I understood she was struggling. I made excuses for her, but then Monday passed. Then Tuesday. I called her number, voicemail. I left a message, calm and practical. Deborah, I need to know your plans. The kids are fine, but please call me. She texted back 2 days later. Sorry, Mom, things are crazy. Can you keep them a little longer? No question mark, as if it weren't a question at all. I kept them. What else was I going to do? The weeks folded into each other with the terrible ease of things that go wrong slowly. Casey started at the local kindergarten. I enrolled her myself, with a note from her pediatrician and a quiet conversation with the school secretary, who had known me since her own children were students in my 3rd grade class. Tyler began speaking in full sentences. He called me Grandma Marge and once told a neighbor that I was his regular mom. I laughed at the time. Later, I would think about those words differently. I heard from Deborah sporadically. A text here, a brief call there, always with the same quality of a person who is managing you rather than talking to you. She sent money twice in the 1st year, small amounts, irregular. Then she stopped. When I raised the subject, she became irritated and said she was going through a hard time, and she thought I understood that. I let it go. The first real warning sign came 18 months in, when I gently suggested that perhaps we should formalize the arrangement, just for school records, for medical decisions, for clarity. Her response came by text at 11:30 at night. Don't start. They're my kids. I know what I'm doing. Did she? Did she know what she was doing when she left a 3-year-old with jelly on his face and drove away without looking back? I didn't respond to the text. I lay in bed in my quiet house. Now not so quiet, filled with the sounds of two small people sleeping down the hall. And I stared at the ceiling, and I thought about what kind of woman I was going to be. Steady, I told myself. Patient. Someone who tends to things. But something had shifted in me that night. Something calcified and careful. I began, quietly and without fanfare, to document everything. Dates of contact, dates of absence, the children's medical appointments, school records, every text Deborah sent. I bought a fireproof safe and I put the documents inside it. I didn't know then how long I would need them. 15 years, as it turned out. 15 years of school pickups and parent-teacher conferences and birthday cakes and chicken pox and first heartbreaks and driving lessons and the small, profound accumulation of a life lived alongside two human beings who needed me. 15 years of being their constant. And then one morning, a police cruiser pulled up in front of my White House with the green shutters, and my daughter stepped out of a car behind it, and she pointed at my front door with the confidence of someone who believed she had the law on her side. I watched from the window. I felt something that was almost calm, the kind of calm that comes not from the absence of fear, but from the presence of preparation. I went to the safe, but I am getting ahead of myself. Let me go back, because the story of that morning on the porch cannot be understood without the story of everything that came before it. There was a moment, I remember it precisely, about 2 years into the arrangement, when I sat down at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and I wrote, in 2 columns, what I had given and what I had received. It was a Tuesday in November. The children were asleep. The house smelled of the soup I had made for dinner, and I needed to see the truth of my life laid out in plain arithmetic. On the left side, I had spent, by rough calculation, over $60,000 of my own savings. The pension Dale left me was modest. My teacher's retirement supplement not much more. I had depleted nearly a third of what I had set aside for my old age on groceries and clothing and medical copays and school supplies and the 1,000 unnamed small costs of raising 2 children. I had given up a planned trip to see my sister in Portland. I had stopped attending the Thursday evening book club I had belonged to for 9 years because I couldn't arrange childcare. I had turned down a part-time position at the local library because the hours conflicted with school pickup. On the right side of the page, I wrote, Casey, Tyler. I looked at the list for a long time. Then I folded it and put it in the safe. The fear I felt in those years was not dramatic. It didn't come in surges or keep me awake screaming. It came quietly, like a slow leak. The persistent, low-level dread of a woman who has taken on something enormous without any formal protection and knows in the back of her practical mind that this can be taken from her at any moment. Deborah could appear on any given morning, load the children into her car, and drive away. Legally, I had no standing. They were her children. I was just the grandmother who had been helping out. The thought of Tyler reaching for Deborah's car door with those trusting eyes, that was the thought I couldn't afford to sit with. So I decided to act. I am not an impulsive woman. I was a 3rd-grade teacher for 27 years, and the quality most essential to that work is not warmth or creativity. It is organization. I know how to break a large problem into manageable steps. I know that panic is the enemy of progress. And so I approached this the way I approached everything, with a legal pad and a clear set of goals. The first thing I did was call a lawyer. Her name was Patricia Oakes, and she had an office above a dry cleaning shop on Millhaven's Main Street. A woman in her early 50s, practical and unflappable, with reading glasses she wore on a chain and a habit of writing things down the moment she heard them. I had known her by reputation. She had handled Dale's estate, but I had never needed her for anything like this. I sat across from her desk on a Wednesday morning in February, and I told her everything. The Saturday drop-off, the Sunday that never came, the years since, the texts I had saved, the records I had kept, the money I had spent. I told her about the yellow legal pad with the 2 columns. I put a folder of documents on her desk, organized chronologically, indexed on a cover sheet. And I watched her eyes move across the pages with the focused attention of someone who was beginning to understand the shape of what she was looking at. She looked up. "How long have you been keeping these records, Marjorie?" "Since about 18 months in," I said. "Good," she said. It wasn't a compliment. It was a professional assessment. She explained my options. In Ohio, a grandparent could petition for legal custody under certain conditions, abandonment being among the strongest grounds. There was also the possibility of obtaining power of attorney, which I had in part already established for medical purposes through the children's pediatrician, who had been cooperative and kind. But what Patricia told me, in her direct and unsentimental way, was that the most protective route was a formal custody filing. Something that would give me standing in law, not just in practice. If she comes back, Patricia said, and she decides she wants them, you need to be in a position where a judge is the one who decides what happens next. Not her, not you. A judge. And if she contests it? Patricia paused. That depends on what she's been doing for for these past 2 years. Do you have documentation of her absence? I opened my folder to the second indexed section and slid it across the desk. She looked at the dates, the gaps, the long silences measured in months. "Yes," she said quietly. "I think we can work with this." I drove home through the flat Ohio winter, past bare fields and gray sky, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. The specific steadiness that comes from moving from worry into action. The children were in school. The soup on the stove would be ready by the time they got home. And somewhere across town, a lawyer was beginning to read through everything I had built, year by year, in that fireproof safe. I wasn't afraid of Deborah. Not exactly. I was afraid of losing Casey and Tyler, and those are very different fears. One is about a person. The other is about something that has already become your life. I chose to protect my life. Patricia moved methodically, which suited me. She filed a petition for grandparent custody in the Millhaven Family Court at the end of March. A Tuesday, I remember, because Tyler had a dentist appointment that afternoon, and I had to arrange for Casey to take the school bus home. Small logistics wrapped around large legal machinery. That was the texture of my life. The filing was not yet public in any dramatic sense, but in the way of small-town paperwork, it created a trail. Patricia had sent a formal notice to Deborah's last known address in Columbus, a legal requirement. And within 10 days, I received the first sign that the message had landed. Deborah called. Not a text this time. An actual call at 7:15 in the evening, while Tyler was doing homework at the kitchen table and Casey was upstairs arguing with her hair. "Mom." Her voice had that particular quality I recognized. Controlled, careful, the voice she used when she was managing a situation. "I got some kind of letter from a lawyer." "Yes," I said. "What is that about?" "I think it explains itself." A pause. When she spoke again, the control had thinned slightly, the edge showing underneath. "Are you seriously trying to take my kids?" I had thought carefully about this conversation, had even practiced it once, quietly, in the car. "I'm trying to make sure Casey and Tyler have legal stability," I said. "Which they haven't had." "They live with you," she said, as if that settled it. "They live with me with no legal agreement, no financial support, and no certainty about tomorrow," I said. "That's not the same thing." She told me I was overreacting. She said she had been going through something. She said she had always intended to come back for them. She just needed time. Time. That great alibi of the absent. I had heard this language before in other forms, from other people, who confused intention with action. I let her talk. I did not raise my voice. I said, "I understand," which was true, though not in the way she meant. When she hung up, the tenor of her voice had shifted to something I couldn't quite name. Not anger, not exactly. More like calculation. And that told me something. She wasn't going to let this go quietly. I was right. Over the following weeks, I noticed small things. A call to Casey's school that the front office flagged for me. A woman identifying herself as Casey's mother asking about enrollment records. A similar inquiry to the pediatrician's office, which the nurse, who had known our family for years, mentioned to me with a careful look that said she understood what was happening. Deborah was gathering her own information. She was building a counterposition. I told Patricia. "Expect it," Patricia said. "It means she's taking this seriously. That's actually useful. It means she'll surface more formally, which gives us more to work with." The decisive document came in May. Patricia had requested, through the appropriate legal channels, records related to Casey and Tyler's well-being during the period of Deborah's absence. This is where the work of 15 years, the organized folders, the dated notes, the meticulous preservation of every text and receipt, began to reveal its full shape. But it was a document we had not produced ourselves that mattered most. Through the family court process, we obtained records from Franklin County, Columbus, that showed Deborah had, in fact, been involved in a child services investigation during the first year after she dropped the children off. A neighbor had filed a complaint. There had been a home visit. A social worker had noted, in dry bureaucratic language, the absence of the children from the home and the condition of the residence. The file had been closed when the investigator determined that the children were, quote, residing safely with maternal grandmother. They had known. The state of Ohio had known somewhere in its vast filing system that Casey and Tyler were with me and had considered that an acceptable resolution. That document sat on Patricia's desk like a stone. "She didn't just leave them," Patricia said slowly. "She was already under investigation when she did, and she never told you." "No," I said. "She did not." The thing about a point of no return is that you often don't feel it dramatically when you cross it. You don't hear a sound or feel the ground shift. You just look down at a piece of paper and understand, with the same quiet certainty you'd have reading a weather report, that things have changed shape permanently. I drove home. The apple tree in the backyard was blooming. Casey was on the porch swing, talking on her phone with the elaborate privacy of a 14-year-old. She waved at me with one hand without interrupting her conversation. I waved back. I went inside, put my keys on the hook by the door, and sat down in the kitchen chair where I had sat for 43 years of decisions, and I thought. She left them because she was in trouble, and she knew she was in trouble, and she never said a word. And I thought, every excuse I made for her. Every night I told myself she was struggling, she'd come around, she needed time. All of it true, maybe, and none of it enough. There was no anger in what I felt. I want to be precise about that. What I felt was closer to grief. The final, complete, unsentimental kind. The kind that comes when you stop waiting for a person to become someone they are not going to become. I went to the safe. I filed the new document. I called Patricia and told her we were moving forward. No hesitation. No looking back. The custody hearing was scheduled for the second week of September, a date that struck me with a particular irony, given that it was almost exactly 13 years to the month since Deborah had driven away with a diaper bag and left 2 small children on my porch. Patricia and I had spent the summer preparing. Witness statements from Casey's school principal, from the pediatrician, from the next-door neighbor, Linda Marsh, who had watched me pick Tyler up from the bus stop through 7 winters of Ohio weather. A financial accounting of what I had spent, verified where possible by receipts and bank records. The Franklin County Social Services document. A declaration from the children's therapist. Casey had seen one briefly at 12, for anxiety, attesting to the stability of their home environment. It was a thorough case. Patricia said so in the measured way she had of offering assessments. Not warm, not cold, simply accurate. With the grim practicality of someone checking a weather forecast before a trip. He had a history of aggressive family court work, the kind of aggressive that shows up in reviews as tenacious when you like him and ruthless when you don't. Fitch filed a counter-motion in August claiming that I had, in effect, alienated the children from their mother by failing to facilitate contact. This was the legal language for, "It's your fault she wasn't around." I read the document at Patricia's office, and I felt the specific cold fury of someone watching a lie dressed in formal sentences. I had facilitated contact every time Deborah had chosen to make contact, which was rarely, inconsistently, and always on her terms. I had never spoken against her to Casey and Tyler, not once. I had answered their questions about her with as much truth as I could manage, and as much gentleness as the truth allowed. But what frightened me more than the legal maneuver was what came the following week. Roy called. Roy, Deborah's ex-husband, the father of Casey and Tyler, a man I had not heard from in 4 years. He called me on a Wednesday evening in the kind of voice that wants to sound casual and lands somewhere in the neighborhood of menacing. "Marjorie," he said, "I think we need to talk about what you're doing." "I'm pursuing legal custody of the children," I said, "which I imagine you've been told." "You realize if you push this, you could lose everything," he said. "We could come in together, me and Deborah, and make a case that the kids should come back to their parents, both of us. The court looks at that differently than a single mom trying to get them back." I sat very still. "Is that a threat, Roy?" "It's information, Roy," I said. "You have not paid child support in 3 years. You have seen your children twice in 5 years. I have documented both of those facts." A silence. "If you want to come into this proceeding," I said, "Patricia Oakes at 114 West Main Street will be happy to receive your filings. Is there anything else?" He hung up. I set the phone down on the kitchen table, and I sat in the quiet house, and I breathed slowly and deliberately, the way I had learned to breathe through hard things. Outside, Casey and Tyler were in the backyard, Casey reading on the old lawn chair, Tyler kicking a soccer ball against the fence with the repetitive, meditative focus teenagers sometimes have. Neither of them had any idea what was happening in the rooms of the adult world around them. That was the weight I carried alone. The following week, Deborah appeared. Not with a lawyer, not with a police officer, not yet. She appeared at the end of my driveway on a Thursday afternoon, sitting in a car I didn't recognize, and she called my cell phone. "Come outside," she said. I went. I stood on the porch. I did not walk down the drive. "You need to drop this," she said through the car window. Her voice was controlled, but her eyes were not. "I'm their mother. That is a fact a judge will understand regardless of what your lawyer puts in a file. A judge will also understand 13 years of absence," I said. "I was struggling," she said. "I had problems." "And the children had me," I said. "That's what I'll be showing the court." Her jaw tightened. "I will fight this, Mom. I will fight this, and I will win, and I will take them, and you will be left in that house by yourself. Do you understand me?" I looked at her for a moment. I thought of the yellow jacket Casey had worn when she was 4 years old. I thought of Tyler's hand reaching toward a car that didn't stop. I understand you, I said. Drive safely. I went inside. I locked the door. I leaned against the wall in the hallway, and I allowed myself, privately and briefly, to shake. Then I called Patricia and told her what had happened. She said, "Good, that's more for the file." I took 4 days after that. I called my sister in Portland, not to explain everything, just to hear her voice. I walked in the park near the school where Dale and I used to take weekend walks. I let Linda Marsh bring me a casserole and sit at my kitchen table and talk about nothing important for 2 hours. I let myself be an old woman who was tired, just for those 4 days before I picked up the legal pad again. Rest is not weakness. I had learned that the hard way, and I honored it. Deborah called on a Monday, 11 days after the confrontation in the driveway, and the change in her voice was immediate and deliberate. The way a person adjusts their costume before walking through a different door. She was warm, apologetic even. She said she'd been under enormous stress, that she'd said things she didn't mean, that she loved her children, and she loved me, and she didn't want this to become a war between us. She said she wanted to talk about a compromise, maybe a co-parenting arrangement of some kind. Maybe she could start visiting regularly, rebuild her relationship with the kids, and we could withdraw the court filing and handle things as a family. Handle things as a family. I recognized the language. I had heard it before. Not from Deborah specifically, but in the long human pattern of people who want to move back to an informal arrangement the moment the formal one begins to threaten them. Remove the court. Remove the documentation. Remove the oversight. Go back to the system that had allowed 13 years of absence to accumulate without consequence. I appreciate you calling, I said. Does that mean you'll think about it? I'm always willing to listen, I said. Which was true, and said nothing. She pressed gently. What would it take? What were my concerns? Could we sit down together, just the two of us, without lawyers, and talk about what was best for Casey and Tyler? All reasonable-sounding sentences, all containing the same central request. Step back from the legal process. I told her I would be in touch. I called Patricia within the hour and described the conversation verbatim as best I could recall it. Patricia listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Don't meet without me present. If she wants to discuss terms, it goes through proper channels. Any informal agreement you make now could be used to argue you're not serious about the custody petition." "I know," I said. I wasn't going to. There was a brief pause. "You knew before you called me." "I just wanted it documented," I said. After that, the phone was quiet for about 10 days. I imagined Deborah and Roy somewhere in Columbus having conversations I would never hear, recalibrating their approach. They were waiting to see what I would do. Fine. Let them wait. What I did in those 10 days was build something sturdier than a legal file. I had never been a woman who asked for help easily. Dale used to say I had the self-sufficiency of someone who had been disappointed enough times to stop depending on others, and he said it with enough gentleness that I couldn't entirely argue with it. But age and the weight of these years had done something useful to my pride. It had made me practical about my own limits. I called the principal of Casey's school, a steady, professional woman named Grace Holloway, who had known both children since elementary school. I explained, carefully and without drama, what was happening in the family court, and asked if she would be willing to provide a statement on behalf of the children's stability and educational continuity. She said yes without hesitation. I called the pediatrician, Dr. Meera Srinivasan, who had seen Tyler through every illness and Casey through the years of growing pains, and asked the same. She said yes. She also mentioned, quietly, that her office had fielded 2 more inquiries from Columbus recently, and she wanted me to know she had not provided information to anyone who was not the designated caregiver on file. I thanked her. I called the county social services office and introduced myself to a caseworker named Kevin Larkin, who had been assigned to do a standard welfare check, a routine part of custody proceedings in Ohio. He came to the house on a Wednesday afternoon. He drank the coffee I offered. He walked through the rooms with the eyes of someone doing a job carefully. He looked at the calendar on the wall where school activities were listed in different colored markers, Casey's in blue, Tyler's in green. He asked both children, separately, routine questions. Tyler told him that Grandma Marge made the best chili in the state of Ohio. Casey, with the directness of a 14-year-old, told him that this was her home and she had no interest in moving. Kevin Larkin wrote things in his notebook and shook my hand when he left and said he'd be filing his report with the court the following week. I built the support carefully, and each piece of it was real, not manufactured, not coached, not performed. Real people telling the true story of a real life. That was, I had come to understand, the only kind of support that holds. In the evenings, when the house was quiet and Casey was in her room and Tyler was watching something on his laptop, I would sit on the porch swing that Dale had built, and I would listen to the neighborhood settling into night, the distant sound of the Marsh family's television, the occasional car on the main road, the particular silence of an Ohio fall. And I would feel not happiness exactly, but something close to steadiness. I was not alone. I had built something, and it was real. They came on a Saturday morning in mid-October, 2 weeks before the hearing date. I saw the car from the kitchen window, Roy's black Jeep, not the unfamiliar sedan Deborah had been driving. They parked in front of the house rather than in the drive, as if establishing neutral territory. Deborah got out first, dressed carefully in a way I hadn't seen in years. Pressed blouse, hair done, the deliberate appearance of a person presenting a version of themselves. Roy followed, in a button-down shirt that had the slightly stiff quality of clothes put on for an occasion. I watched them walk up the path. Casey was still asleep. She slept late on Saturdays, the privilege of a teenager, and Tyler was in the backyard. I was grateful for the quiet. I went to the door before they knocked. "Deborah," I said. "Roy." "Mom?" Deborah's face arranged itself into something that was almost a smile. "We wanted to come in person. Can we come in?" I considered, for a fraction of a second, the various ways a person might respond to that question. Then I stepped back and opened the door. They sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had written in 2 columns on a yellow legal pad, the same table where Patricia Oakes's number was written in my address book, the same table that had been the center of this family's daily life for 13 years. I made coffee. This seemed to either reassure or unsettle them. I couldn't tell which. Roy spoke first, which surprised me. I had expected Deborah to lead. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," he said, in the voice of a man who has rehearsed. "About the kids, about what's best for them. And Deb and I, we've been talking, really talking, about getting back on track as a family." "I see," I said. "Tyler and Casey need their parents," Deborah said. Her tone was warm, modulated, the voice of the phone call from 10 days ago. "I know I've made mistakes. Roy knows he's made mistakes. But we're their parents, Mom. That doesn't go away." "No," I said, "it doesn't. So we want to ask you, and we mean this sincerely, to hold off on the hearing. Just pause it. Let us try to do this properly, through mediation, through family counseling, whatever it takes. You don't want to drag the kids through a court process, do you?" There it was. The shape of the thing, finally visible beneath the pressed blouses and rehearsed sentences. You don't want to drag the kids through a court process. as if the court process were something I had invented, as if the alternative, their informal, unenforceable, undocumented good intentions, were the kinder option. "I understand what you're asking," I said. "Then you'll consider it?" Deborah leaned forward slightly. I said I understood. I didn't say I'd consider it. The warmth in Deborah's face shifted. Not dramatically. She was controlled, I'll grant her that. But I had known her face for 45 years, and I saw the thing underneath it, the way you see a crack in a wall that's been painted over. Roy tried a different approach. "Marjorie, you have to understand that if this goes to a hearing, it becomes a matter of record. Things that are said in that room, about both sides, they stay. Deborah's past issues, sure, but also things about you. How you've handled money, whether you've been facilitating a parental relationship, whether a 68-year-old woman is really the appropriate long-term guardian for—" "Roy," I said, "are you threatening me?" He leaned back. "I'm being realistic. You told me the same thing on the phone in August," I said. "I gave you Patricia Oakes's address then. That offer stands." Deborah put her hand on the table, not touching mine, just placing it there. A gesture that wanted to read as conciliatory. "We could see the kids today," she said, and the softness in her voice was aimed like a tool. "Just a visit, a first step. Doesn't that seem better than a courtroom?" For a moment, I want to be honest about this, I felt the pull of it. Not because I believed her, but because I was tired. Because some part of me that had been a mother before it was anything else still wanted a version of this where Deborah became who she should have been, where we sat around this table as a whole family, where the 2 columns on the yellow legal pad were never necessary. But I had been a third-grade teacher for 27 years. I knew the difference between a child who wanted to do better and a child who wanted to avoid the consequence of not having done better. They can sound exactly alike. They are not the same thing. "No," I said. The mask, such as it was, came down. Deborah stood up. Her chair scraped the floor. "You are making a serious mistake," she said. "We will be in that courtroom, and we will tell that judge everything. Do you understand me? Everything." "I hope you do," I said. "I hope you tell the judge everything." Roy stood too. He didn't say anything more. They walked to the door with the stiff dignity of people who had not gotten what they came for. I stood in my kitchen and listened to the Jeep start and pull away. Then I sat down. The fear came then. Quiet, honest fear. Not of Deborah. Not exactly. Fear of the hearing room. Of the formal exposure of all of it. Of some judge I had never met, holding the shape of my life in their hands and making a decision I couldn't control. Fear of losing. I sat with it. I let it exist without trying to argue it away. And then, the way cold water clarifies things, it moved through me and left something harder and cleaner in its place. They had come here today because they were afraid. Afraid of the documents in my safe, afraid of Grace Holloway and Dr. Srinivasan and Kevin Larkin's notebook, afraid of the 2 columns on the yellow legal pad. They should be afraid. I picked up the phone and called Patricia. "They came to the house," I said. Roy made another implicit threat about the hearing. Deborah asked me to delay. "Did you record the conversation?" I had not. I had not thought to. "Next time," Patricia said, "turn on your phone's voice memo before you answer the door." Next time. I wrote it on the legal pad. I was ready. The morning it happened was a Thursday in November, 3 weeks after the hearing date that Deborah's lawyer had succeeded, on procedural grounds, in pushing back by 1 month. A small delay. Patricia had expected it. "It's a tactic," she told me. "They're hoping for attrition. Don't give it to them." I had not given it to them. I was at the kitchen table when the police cruiser pulled up. 6:47 in the morning. I know because I had just looked at the clock to time Casey's toast. Tyler was still getting dressed upstairs. Casey was sitting across from me, eating breakfast, with the slow, private concentration of a teenager before she's fully awake. I heard the car door, then another, then the sound of footsteps on the porch. The knock was official. 3 sharp raps, the particular sound of someone who knocks as part of their job. I told Casey to stay at the table. I went to the door. The officer was a young man. 30s, dark uniform, the careful expression of someone who has been briefed on a situation and is not yet sure what he's walked into. His name tag read Officer Dennison. Behind him, to the left, was Deborah. She looked different from the woman who had sat at my kitchen table 3 weeks earlier. The careful blouse was gone. She wore jeans and a jacket, and her face had the particular tight quality of someone running on adrenaline and grievance. She had the expression of a person who has convinced herself, fully and completely, that she is the wronged party in a story that started long before this morning. Beside her stood a man I didn't know, middle-aged, heavy-set, wearing a jacket with a legal firm's name embroidered on the breast pocket. Gerald Fitch had apparently made a house call. "Mrs. Calloway?" the officer said. "Yes. I'm Officer Dennison with the Millhaven PD. I've received a report that you are currently housing 2 minors, Casey and Tyler Whelan, without their mother's consent. The complainant," he glanced briefly at Deborah, "alleges that the children have been retained against their will and that she was not given a choice in the matter. She stole my children." That was the phrase Deborah had apparently used. That was the complaint on file. I looked at Deborah. She met my eyes with the defiant, slightly frantic energy of someone who has committed to a course of action and is waiting to see if it works. There was something almost desperate in the set of her jaw, the look of a woman who needs this to go a particular way and has not considered what happens if it doesn't. I looked back at Officer Dennison. "Would you like to come in?" I said. He stepped inside. Fitch started to follow. I looked at him. "Are you a police officer?" "I'm legal counsel for—" "Then you're welcome to wait on the porch," I said. Officer Dennison did not contradict me. Fitch stayed on the porch. Inside, Casey had come to the kitchen doorway. She looked at the officer, then at me, and I saw the question in her face. The old familiar alarm of a child who has learned that the adult world can shift without warning. I said quietly, "It's all right. Go upstairs, please. Get Tyler. Stay up there. Stay." She went, without argument, with the trust that 15 years earns. I turned to Officer Dennison. "I'd like to show you some documents." "Ma'am, I do need to—" "I know what you need to do," I said. "And I'm not going to make your morning difficult. I'm going to make it simple. Please sit down." He sat. I went to the study, to the safe, the same fireproof safe I had bought when Casey was 6 years old. And I turned the combination with hands that did not shake. I want to note that my hands did not shake. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because I had been preparing for this specific moment for years, and preparation has a way of steadying the body, even when the mind is loud. I pulled out the accordion file, thick, tabbed, indexed on the cover page in my own handwriting, and I carried it to the kitchen and set it on the table in front of the officer. "This," I said, "is a chronological record of my care for Casey and Tyler Whelan, beginning September 27, 2009, when their mother dropped them off for what she described as a weekend visit and did not return for any substantial period of time thereafter." I opened the first section, dated contact logs, text messages printed and labeled, school enrollment records with my signature, medical authorizations, a copy of the limited power of attorney for healthcare I had obtained in the second year. Every document in order, every date visible, every gap in Deborah's presence accounted for in plain arithmetic. I opened the second section, the Franklin County Social Services document. I explained it, briefly, accurately, and I watched Officer Dennison's pen slow and then stop as he read. "This," I said, "is a record from Franklin County Child Services showing that a welfare investigation was opened regarding Deborah Whelan in 2010, shortly after the children came to live with me. The investigation was closed because the caseworker confirmed the children were in my care and considered to be safe." I opened the third section, the current court filing. "And this," I said, "is an active petition for grandparent custody filed in Mill Haven Family Court in March of this year, case number 2024-FC-0318, currently scheduled for hearing next month. I am represented by Patricia Oakes." I slid the whole file toward him. I could see him recalibrating, reassembling the shape of the story he had been told before he knocked on my door, and the shape of the story that was now sitting on my kitchen table in front of him. "You're serious?" he said. I nodded. "I am." He stood slowly. He walked to the front door, opened it, and looked at Deborah on the porch. I watched his posture change, the slight squaring of the shoulders that means the shape of a situation has reversed. The body language of a professional who has understood that the complaint he arrived to resolve is not what it appeared to be. "Ma'am," he said to Deborah, "I'm going to need you to come with me to the car." Deborah's face went through several things in rapid succession. Confusion, then indignation, then something rawer and more frightened underneath. "What? Why? Those are my children." "Ma'am," he said again, with the patient firmness of someone closing a conversation, "I need to speak with you privately." From the upstairs window, I heard a small sound. I looked up. Tyler's face was pressed to the glass, watching. I gave him what I hoped was a steady look. He pressed his hand flat against the window. I put my hand up too. "Officer Dennison spent 22 minutes in the driveway. I know because I stood at the kitchen window and watched, the way you watch a weather system moving through, not able to stop it, only able to observe its passage." Deborah's hands moved as she spoke. Gerald Fitch had descended from the porch and stood beside her, and I could see the slight lean of his head that meant he was advising her to stop speaking. She did not appear to be taking the advice. Eventually, she did stop. And then she stood very still, and even from that distance, I could see the thing leaving her face. The certainty, the forward momentum, the performance of righteous maternal injury that had presumably been rehearsed in preparation for this morning. When it left, what remained was just her, a woman standing on a November street who had run out of the thing that had been propelling her. Officer Dennison returned to my door. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, "I want to be straightforward with you. Based on the documentation you've provided and the active court case, there is no legal basis for me to take any action here today. The children are in the care of their documented guardian, and there is a pending custody proceeding that is the appropriate venue for any further dispute." He paused. "I'm going to recommend to Ms. Whelan that she communicate only through her legal counsel going forward." "I appreciate that," I said. "I'd also suggest you contact your attorney today and let her know this visit occurred." "I plan to," I said. He nodded. He had the look of a young professional who had handled a situation with more grace than it deserved, and knew it. I appreciated that about him. Patricia filed a motion by end of day. The unannounced police visit, the allegation of child theft, the presence of legal counsel at the scene, all of it went into the record. Patricia described it in her measured way as a pattern of intimidation and harassment designed to destabilize the petitioner. She asked for a judicial notice and a requirement that all further contact between Deborah and the children occur only through established legal channels, pending the hearing. It was granted. The hearing took place on a Thursday in December. Gray sky, cold, the kind of Ohio winter morning that doesn't apologize for itself. Patricia and I arrived at the courthouse at 8:30. I wore the dark blue dress I had worn to Dale's funeral and to Casey's elementary school graduation, the dress I wore when things mattered. We sat at one table. Deborah and Fitch sat at another. Roy was not present. He had, according to Patricia's contacts, quietly withdrawn from any formal involvement in the proceedings. Apparently, the documentation of his non-payment of child support had persuaded him that the courthouse was not a favorable arena. Smart in its way, cowardly in every other. The judge was a woman in her late 50s named the Honorable Catherine Marsh, no relation to Linda Marsh next door, as far as I knew. She had a reputation, Patricia had told me, for patience and precision. She read everything. She took notes. She did not hurry. Fitch argued competently. Deborah's maternal rights, her intention to re-engage, the absence of a formal termination of parental rights, the claim that I had failed to adequately facilitate the parental relationship. He presented two witnesses, a character reference from a woman I had never heard of, and Deborah herself. Deborah on the stand was composed for approximately 12 minutes. Then Patricia began her cross-examination. Patricia asked about September 2009, about the phone calls, about the social services investigation, about the years of financial non-support, about the August phone call where Roy had described the hearing as something that could be used against me, about the October visit to my home, about the November morning with Officer Dennison. For each question, Patricia had a document. Fitch objected frequently. Some objections were sustained. Most were not. By the time Patricia finished, Deborah's composure had the quality of a surface that has been sanded down to almost nothing, still present, technically, but offering no real resistance to what lay beneath it. The judge reviewed materials for a week. Her ruling arrived on a Friday by certified mail. I opened it at the kitchen table alone before the children came home from school. I read it through once, then again. The Honorable Catherine Marsh granted primary physical and legal custody of Casey and Tyler Whelan to Marjorie Ellen Calloway, their maternal grandmother. She cited, in her written opinion, the 15-year continuity of care, the documented absence of the biological mother, the welfare investigation records, the children's own expressed preferences, both had spoken with the court-appointed guardian ad litem, and the November police incident, which the judge described as demonstrating poor judgment, inconsistent with the best interests of the children. Visitation for Deborah. Supervised, bi-monthly, to be increased only upon completion of a parenting course and 6 months of documented consistent contact. Roy. No custody, no visitation request filed. I set the letter down. I sat in my kitchen in my white house with the green shutters for a long moment. In the silence that exists just before children come home and fill a house with the noise of being alive. Then I cried. Not dramatically, just quietly at the table, the way you cry when something you have been holding for a very long time is finally allowed to be set down. When Casey and Tyler came through the door 20 minutes later, I had made tea and my eyes were dry, and I told them that dinner would be chilly. Tyler said, "Yes." The winter after the ruling was the quietest I could remember in years, not empty, but settled, the way a house feels when a rattling window is finally latched. Casey turned 15 in January. We had her birthday dinner with Linda Marsh, Dr. Srinivasan, Grace Holloway, and Patricia, who came with sparkling cider and laughed more than I had ever seen her laugh. Tyler made Casey a crayon card on construction paper, pretending he hadn't tried. She kept it on her desk. Tyler started spring baseball. He was not especially talented but enthusiastically devoted, and I went to every game with a thermos of coffee. I returned to the Thursday book club. I took the part-time position at the library, where Tyler attended the children's reading hour twice and declared it embarrassing, a sign, I decided, of healthy development. The ordinariness of it was the gift, not triumph, not vindication. Just Tuesday evenings doing homework and weekend grocery runs and arguments about screen time. the plainness of a life that is working. And Deborah? She attended the first 2 supervised visitations, late to both. At the third, she didn't appear. No call, no explanation. The same pattern, wearing different clothes. The children came home quiet. I didn't push them to talk. I cooked dinner. I was there. Her supervised schedule was suspended. She hadn't completed the parenting course, hadn't established consistent contact, hadn't done what the judge required. She left Columbus. Someone said Tennessee. Someone said Arizona. Motion without direction. Change without arrival. I did not look for her. Roy owed back child support that would follow him through the courts for years. His relationship with Casey and Tyler existed in the past tense. Photographs on a shelf nobody asked about anymore. The hard truth about some people is not that they are villains. Villainy requires consistency of purpose. Deborah and Roy simply could not sustain what parenthood requires and had spent years avoiding knowing that. The legal process removed the avoidance. What remained was the fact. Casey got the lead in the school's fall production. A woman who refuses to be managed by those around her. I sat in the third row on opening night, holding 2 images of the same person. A 4-year-old in a yellow jacket and the young woman on that stage. Everything between those moments was my life, and I would not have traded a day of it. Tyler, at 14, had become devoted to marine biology. I ordered him every library book on the subject and said nothing about the impracticality. One October evening on the porch swing, Casey sat beside me and we shared the quiet that doesn't need filling. "Grandma Marge, do you ever regret it? Any of it?" I thought, honestly. The money, the years of fear, the legal pad, the safe, the hearing room. "No," I said, "not for a single day." She nodded, as if confirming something she already knew. From the kitchen came the sound of Tyler raiding the refrigerator with the dedication of a teenage boy. Constantly, devotedly, without apology. It sounded exactly like home. 15 years. That is how long it took for just the weekend to become a life. I kept records. I got a lawyer. I didn't make informal deals when formal protection was available. And I never, not once, stopped showing up. If you take nothing else from my story, document everything. Love is not enough without structure to protect it. Some people ask me if I forgive Deborah. I think about that question, and then I look at Casey and Tyler, and I think, I got the better end of this. What would you have done in my place? Tell me in the comments, and thank you, truly, for listening.